Hello class, this is your instructor, Miss Birchfield. In this mini lesson, I'm just going to do a review of factoring and how do you decide what method of factoring to use. So a quick review, the method of factoring is about the number of terms that you have. So any polynomial, what I always want to do is check for my GCF first. Whether it has one or not, that is the very first thing when you have to factor that you want to check for. Once you check for a GCF, if it has a GCF, remove the GCF by factoring. Then you need to determine with what you have left, do you have a binomial, trinomial, or four terms? If it's a polynomial that's a binomial, you want to see if it might be a difference of two squares or a perfect cube. If you need to review, go back and review the mini lesson on those two. If it's a trinomial, a quadratic trinomial, what we want to do is we're going to factor using the slip and slide diamond method. And if I have a polynomial with four terms, I'm going to factor it by grouping. So this first example, I'm looking at my polynomial. I have a binomial. I'm going to see if there's a GCF. We have a GCF. 2 is a common factor here. So we can actually factor out 2. Remember, when you factor out a GCF, you divide the GCF into the terms. So when I divide each term at the top, I'm going to get x squared minus 16. Now, since I've removed my GCF, what I want to do is I want to see if the binomial that's in the parentheses, if it will factor. Well, it's a binomial. Remember, you're going to check to see, is it a difference of two squares or a cube? Well, I'm looking at my terms, and both terms are perfect squares. So we can factor this into conjugates. So bring your 2 down. We're going to take the square root of each term in the parentheses, which will be x plus 4. And then the second parentheses will be x minus 4. And if you need to check, you can full the parentheses out and then multiply by the 2 to get what we started with. This next example, I'm looking for a GCF first. I don't have anything that's common except for 1. So now I'm going to count how many terms I have. I have 3 terms. I've got a trinomial. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the slip and slide. Slip and slide says to multiply the 2 to the 9, and then you're going to do the diamond method. You're going to have a negative 18 in the top of the diamond, and then I'm going to put a negative 7 at the bottom. So what we want is we need to find 2 factors of negative 18 that will give us subtract to give us a negative 7. And looks like 9 and 2 will multiply. So if I want to get a negative 18, I need one of my numbers here to be a negative. Well, the bigger number is always going to get this sign down here. So I'm going to make that a negative 9 and a positive 2. So that when we multiply now, we would get the negative 18. And when we subtract, negative 9 plus 2 is a negative 7. So we're going to factor. We're going to break our x into x minus 9 and x plus 2. And then what we're going to do now is slide the 2 underneath each constant. And we're going to reduce. 9 over 2 will not reduce. So I'm going to slide the 2 in front of the x. And I'm going to reduce 2 divided by 2 will give me a 1. And we have our factors. This next example, I'm going to look to see if I have a GCF. We do have a GCF here. So if I look at 6, 8, and 4, my smaller number is 4. The common factor of 4 is 4 is a factor of 4, but it won't work for 6. 2 is a factor that will work for both 6 and 8. So I'm going to write 2. But you also have to remember to look at the variables. Notice that each term has a. This first term has 1a, this one has 1a, this one has 2. So at most, you can only remove the 1. So remember, when you're determining your variables, always take out the smaller exponent. They all have b's. This one has b squared. This is a b and a b squared. So I'm going to take out the smaller of them, which is just b. And then I'm going to start my parentheses. Now remember here, what we'll do is you can either just visually look at it, or if you need to, you can write your GCF under each term and then divide each one. So 6 divided by 2 is 3. The a's will go away. B squared divided by b is b. Bring your plus down. 8 divided by 2 is 4. And your a and b go away. Or actually, I don't say they don't cancel. They just reduce to 1. And I'm going to bring my minus down. 4 divided by 2 is 2. A squared divided by a is a. B squared divided by b is b. Now, when I do this, I always just want to check. I've got a trinomial inside, but that trinomial is not a quadratic. So it's no longer, we can't break that, what's in the parentheses, down anymore. So we are at our final answer at this point right here. So the next example, I'm going to look, there's no GCF. I've got a binomial. Binomial, remember, you're going to see, is it a difference of 2 squares or a cube? Well, right here, because of the 3, I'm thinking a cube. 27 is a perfect cube, so is 8. So this one is the one where we're going to use that formula where it will break into a binomial. So I'm going to do the cube root of 27, which is 3, and the cube root of x cubed, which is x. Bring my minus down, and the cube root of 8 is 2. Once I get that binomial, then I can fill in my trinomial. I'm going to square the first term. That's 9x squared. I'm going to have a plus now. I'm going to multiply 3x and 2 to get 6x. And then I got a plus again, and I'm going to square the 2 to get 4. And we're done. This trinomial in here will not factor out. So when you get to this point, you will no longer be able to go any further if it's a perfect cube. The next polynomial, we're going to look, there's no GCF. The only thing that's common, when I say no GCF, 1 is always going to be a common factor, but 1 doesn't help us with breaking this thing down. So I've got 4 terms. Since I have a polynomial with 4 terms, I'm going to use the grouping method. I'm going to group the first 2 terms together and the last 2 terms together. And then I'm going to do a GCF from each group. So my first group here, when I look, x cubed and x squared, we can take out x squared because that's the smaller exponent. And let's divide. If we divide x cubed by x squared, we're left with an x. Minus x squared divided by x squared is 1. The next group, what we have common is a 2. I'm going to bring this sign down, so I'm going to have a negative 2. Now when I divide, I've got a negative 2x divided by negative 2, which makes that a positive x. And then a positive 2 divided by a negative 2 is a negative 1. The goal in grouping is to get these binomials the same. Since they are, that's a GCF, so that's one of the factors we will write. And then your second factor, you just write what's in front, x squared minus 2, and you've got your factors. Here is our last example. It's a trinomial. It does not have a GCF except for 1. So I'm going to use the slip. So I'm going to do my diamond method now. I'm going to have 36 in the top because 4 times 9 is 36. I'm going to have 12 in the bottom. And then since I have a plus here, I'm looking for 2 numbers that are going to multiply to 36 and we'll add to 12, and that's going to be a positive 6 and a positive 6. So I'm going to factor x plus 6, x plus 6, but be careful, don't forget that since you slipped, you have to slide this number back underneath. So when we reduce this fraction, we're going to reduce it. It will be 3 over 2 for both. Now notice, since I still have a fraction, I'm going to slide the 2 now in front of the x. And if you notice, this one is actually a perfect square trinomial. So what we can do, since it's the same for factors, I'm going to write 2x plus 3 squared. I hope this lesson has helped. If you have any questions, please contact me with any questions.